The fire came before the warning. Nara had the first wall crack open and she was already running, bare feet on cold stone, her heart slamming against her ribs before her mind had caught up with what was happening. The mountain sanctuary had stood for 300 years. It had never burned. And yet orange light was eating through the gaps in the eastern wall, and the screaming outside was not the kind of screaming that people recovered from. She grabbed the iron box from the altar shelf on instinct alone. Her hands knew where it was before her eyes found it. She had cleaned that shelf every morning for 6 years. She had polished that box and never once opened it, because the heartstone inside was not hers to touch. It belonged to the pack. It belonged to the bloodlines. It belonged to something so much older than Nara that she felt small just standing near it. The door blew inward. 2 men came through the smoke. They wore no pack markings. Their eyes moved fast and purposeful, not frightened, not confused. They were not survivors stumbling through fire. They were the reason for it. Nara ran left. There was a narrow corridor behind the altar, barely wide enough for one person, and she pressed herself into it and moved fast. She could hear them behind her, their boots heavy on the stone, and she understood in a single cold second that they were not chasing her. They were chasing what she was carrying. The iron box was small, barely larger than her palm. But even through the metal she could feel something inside it, a faint warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. A pulse that was not her own. She heard one of the men shout something to the other. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. They were telling each other she was cornered. She was cornered. The corridor ended at a door that would not open. She pulled the handle twice, 3 times. Locked or blocked, it did not matter. The men were coming and there was nowhere left. Nara looked at the iron box in her hands. She thought about what she knew of the heartstone. She had heard the elder speak of it 100 times in lessons she had mostly half listened to. The soul bond of the founding bloodlines. The anchor of the pack's shared memory. 3 centuries of connection pressed into one small black gem. She thought about what the raiders would do with it if they got it. She opened the box. The stone was smaller than she expected. Dark as the space between stars, perfectly smooth, no larger than the end of her thumb. It did not glow. It did not hum. It just sat there looking like a thing of no consequence at all. Nara put it in her mouth and swallowed it. The men came around the corner 2 seconds later. They found her standing against a locked door with an empty iron box in her hands. One of them grabbed her by the front of her shirt and lifted her half off the ground. He was large in the way that left no room for doubt about what he could do to her. His eyes went to the box. He shook it. Empty. His face did something complicated. Nara looked back at him and said nothing. He dropped her. Said something to his partner. The partner shook his head. They turned and walked back through the smoke, and Nara slid down the wall and sat on the cold floor and pressed both hands flat against her stomach. Something was burning. Not on the outside. From within. She felt it move through her like a coal dropped into still water, sending heat out in slow rings that reached all the way to her fingertips and the backs of her knees and the roots of her hair. She pressed her teeth together and breathed through her nose and told herself it would pass. It did not pass. She was still sitting there when the wall beside her cracked and the stone ceiling above began to groan. She got up because getting up was the only remaining option, and she walked back through the burning corridor and out through the place where the eastern wall used to be, into the cold mountain night, and she kept walking until the ground went soft beneath her feet and she understood she had reached the tree line. Behind her, the sanctuary collapsed. She turned and watched it fall. The fire was already claiming the roof. In the orange light she could see the shapes of other people moving, some helping each other, some alone. She could not tell who had gotten out and who had not. She knew that the heartstone was inside her body and that the people who wanted it had not gotten it, and she held on to that fact the way a drowning person holds on to anything. Her heartbeat was wrong. She noticed it standing there in the trees. 2 beats close together, then a pause, then 2 more. Like something else was counting alongside her own rhythm. She pressed 2 fingers to her throat and felt it. Her pulse and something else. Both together. She told herself it was fear. She told herself it was the fire and the running and the shock of the cold air. She told herself a lot of things that night. She passed out somewhere in the dark between the burning mountain and the valley below, and when she woke up, 3 days had gone by and someone had carried her to a camp she did not recognize, and she was very, very sick. She had not known that 3 days had passed until the healer, a quiet older woman named Grace who had survived the raid with a burn along her left arm and an expression of permanent controlled worry, told her. Nara tried to sit up. Grace put a hand on her shoulder and stopped her without apparent effort. Your body needs more time, Grace said. You were burning from the inside when Owen found you. He thought you had a fever. We all thought you had a fever. It was not a fever, Nara said. No, Grace agreed. It was not. The camp was what remained of the mountain park, pulled together in the valley between 2 ridges where the trees were thick enough to provide some cover. Nara counted maybe 60 people moving between the shelters. She did not know how many there had been before. She had never thought to count. She had been a keeper's daughter, not a warrior or a planner, and the numbers of things had not seemed important until now, when the difference between the number before and the number now was a measure of what had been lost. Grace pressed her fingers gently to the left side of Nara's chest. Then the right side. Then she sat back and looked at her with that expression again, controlled and worried, and something underneath that Nara could not name. There are 2, Grace said. Nara said nothing. There is your heartbeat, Grace said carefully, and there is something else. They are not the same. They are not quite in the same rhythm. The heartstone, Nara said. Grace closed her eyes briefly. You swallowed the heartstone. They were going to take it. I know. Grace opened her eyes. I am not angry with you. I am not sure anyone here has the right to be angry with you. What you did was, she stopped. Started again. No one has ever done what you did. The stone has always been held in the iron box. It has always been treated as something outside of anybody. Something separate. And now it is. Inside me, Nara said. Yes. Nara pressed her hand to her own stomach. The burning was lower now, settled into something that felt less like pain and more like presence. Like knowing a heavy piece of furniture was in a room even when you could not see it. Something that changed the weight of the air. Can it come out? She asked. Grace looked at her for a long moment. We sent a message to the healers at the northern camp. We are waiting for an answer. That was not the answer to the question Nara had asked, and both of them knew it. She spent the next 2 days in the shelter, which was a generous word for a structure held together by canvas and ropes and the determination of people who had lost too much to allow themselves to lose anything else. She could hear the camp through the fabric walls. Conversations in low voices. Children being kept quiet. The sound of people who were frightened but still moving, still eating, still making plans, because the alternative to all of that was giving up, and none of them had done that yet. Owen came to see her on the second day. He was a young man, maybe 20, with red hair and the particular kind of exhausted politeness that people develop when they have been through something and are not yet sure how to speak about it. He had been the one who found her in the forest. He sat on the ground beside her sleeping mat and turned a small stone over and over in his hands, not the heartstone, just a pebble from the valley floor, and he said, "Everyone knows what you did." Nara said, "What are they saying about it?" Owen thought about this. Some people say you saved the pack. Some people say you might have. He stopped. Turned the pebble over again. The heartstone is not just an object. The elders always said it was alive in some way. That it carried something real. And now it is inside a person who is not. Who is not Pac, Nara said. I was not going to say that. You did not have to. She said it without bitterness, because bitterness would have taken energy she did not have. She was not Pac. She had always known it. Her mother had been human, a wanderer who had come through the mountain pass in winter and stayed when spring made living seem less urgent. Her father had been a keeper, low in the hierarchy, trusted with objects rather than territory or decisions. Nara had grown up on the edges of everything, close enough to belong and far enough to feel the distance every day. She had swallowed the pack soul and now the pack did not know what to do with her, and honestly, she did not know either. The response from the Northern healers came that evening. Grace read it twice before she brought it to Nara, and when she arrived her face had that controlled worry pulled very tight. "They are sending someone," Grace said. "Who?" "Someone who will need to assess you directly. Someone who has the authority to make decisions about the stone." Nara understood that Grace was choosing these words carefully. She understood that the person being sent was not a healer. "Tell me who," Nara said. Grace folded the message precisely. "The Alpha King is coming himself." The camp went quiet in a different way after that. Not the quiet of fear but the quiet of people adjusting their understanding of the situation. An Alpha King did not travel to assess a problem. An Alpha King arrived when the problem had become something that could reshape the world he governed. His name moved through the camp in low voices throughout the night. Nara lay on her mat and counted her double heartbeat and thought about what it meant that the most powerful man in the northern packs was traveling to look at her. She was still thinking about it when she finally fell asleep. She dreamed of something vast and dark and warm, moving slowly like a river that had been flowing for so long it had stopped being in a hurry. She dreamed of voices she did not know layered on top of each other the way music layers, each one separate but all of them part of the same thing. She dreamed of a mountain she had never seen with a sky above it that was the same color as the heartstone. She woke up with the taste of stone in her mouth and her double heartbeat steady as a drum. He arrived on a gray morning when the mist was still sitting in the valley like it had nowhere more important to be. Nara heard the change in the camp before she saw it. The particular shift in the sound of people moving around outside, a kind of attention being paid that had not been there before. She was sitting up when Owen came to the shelter entrance and told her, unnecessarily, that someone was coming. She had pictured Kale many ways in the 2 days since Grace had told her he was coming. She had pictured someone enormous and wearing authority like armor. She had pictured someone cold. She had pictured someone who would walk in and look at the situation and make a decision about her the way you make a decision about an object that has ended up in the wrong place. He was tall. That part she had gotten right. He walked through the camp with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have spent a long time being followed, no gesture wasted, nothing performed. He had dark hair and a jaw that looked like it had been set hard for so long it had forgotten how to do anything else. He was followed by 2 other men who stayed far enough back to make it clear they were not advisors but guards. He stopped outside her shelter. Grace said something to him that Nara could not hear. He looked at the shelter entrance. Then he dug through it and straightened up inside, and the space, which had felt adequate before, became suddenly small. He looked at her. She looked back. What happened in the following 3 seconds was not something Nara had words for afterward. It was not dramatic. He did not stagger or go pale. But he went very still in a way that was different from his ordinary stillness, the way a compass needle is different from any other needle because of what it is responding to. Something behind his eyes sharpened. He could feel it. She could tell from the look on his face that he could feel it, the heartstone inside her, his bloodlines anchor pulling at him from inside a person he had never met, from inside someone who had no business carrying what she was carrying. He sat down on the ground across from her. Not on a chair, not on anything that would have elevated him. Just on the ground, which surprised her enough that she felt her own expression do something she had not intended. "Tell me your name," he said. His voice was low and even. "Nara," she said. "Nara." He said it once, not as a greeting, more like he was placing it somewhere in his mind. "Tell me what happened." So she told him. All of it. She told it plainly, without decoration or apology, the way she would have described any event she had witnessed to any person who needed to know. She told him about the 2 men coming through the smoke. She told him about the locked door and the iron box in her hands. She told him about the decision, which had felt less like a decision and more like the only remaining thing to do. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Were you afraid?" She considered the question. "Yes," she said. "I am still afraid. But the stone is still here, so the fear was worth something." Something moved across his face. Not softness exactly, but a shift. Like a door that had been closed so long it had forgotten it had hinges. He said, "The heart stone carries 300 years of my family's history. Every alpha in my bloodline back to the founding is bound to it in some way. I have been able to feel its presence since I was 7 years old. Since my father put my hand on the iron box and told me what it was. I have always known where it was, the way you know where the sun is even with your eyes closed." He paused. "And then 4 days ago it disappeared," he said. "And I felt the absence like." He stopped. He looked at his hands. "And then this morning, coming down into this valley, I felt it again. And it was here. Inside you. I did not do it to cause a problem," Nara said. "I know that." He looked up. "I know exactly what you did and why you did it. What I do not yet know is what we do now." "The healers at the northern camp were asked," Nara said. Grace said they responded. "They did." He did not elaborate on what they had said, but his expression said enough. Whatever the response was, it had not been a simple answer. Grace came in then, which was the first time Nara had seen anyone interrupt the Alpha King and survive it without visible consequences. He did not seem annoyed. He looked at Grace with the attention of someone who was used to listening to people who knew things he did not. Grace said, carefully and precisely, "We need to discuss the extraction." Cale said, "Yes." Grace looked at Nara. "The northern healers believe it is possible. Theoretically. But the bond between the stone and a living body, especially one that has been forming for this many days, is," she chose her next word with the care of someone selecting a path through difficult ground. "Complex." "What does complex mean?" Nara said. Grace and Cale looked at each other. "Tell me," Nara said. Grace said, "It means that attempting to remove it now would be very dangerous for you. The stone has begun forming connections to your body that we do not fully understand. The healers fear that removing it could," another careful pause, "cause serious harm." Nara sat with that for a moment. "And leaving it," she said, "is also not without complications," Grace said. "The stone was never meant to be inside a living person. We do not know what it does over time. We do not know what changes it might cause. So the options were, try to take it out and possibly die, or leave it in and find out the hard way what happens when an ancient artifact decides to make a home in someone it was never intended for." Nara looked at Cale. He was watching her with that same quality of attention, direct and unperformed. "You should try the extraction," she said. "That is not a decision I am going to make without your agreement," he said. The word sat in the air of the small shelter and everyone in it was quiet. Grace excused herself after another minute, and the 2 guards who had been standing just outside the entrance moved a little further away, and Nara and Cale were alone in the canvas shelter with the mist moving outside and the double heartbeat steady in Nara's chest. He said, "How long has the second beat been there?" "Since the night of the fire," she said. "Since about an hour after I swallowed it." He leaned forward slightly. She understood that he was listening for it. Listening with something other than his ears. "It sounds like the original pulse," he said quietly. "The one I grew up knowing. But slower. Steadier." He looked at her directly. "That stone has never been still. Not since it was made. It has always been restless. Whatever it is doing inside you, it is not what it does in the box." Nara said, "What is it doing?" "I am not certain," Cale said. "That is the problem." He stayed for 3 more hours. He spoke with Grace and with the other pack members who had survived. He was efficient about it, moving from person to person with attention that did not seem divided even when he was managing many things at once. But twice, from across the camp, Nara caught him looking in the direction of her shelter. She was not sure if he was looking at her or listening for the heartstone. She was not sure those were different things. That evening Grace told her they would attempt the extraction in the morning. They would bring a healer from the northern camp who had experience with pack artifacts, the most experienced one available. They would be as careful as possible. Nara said she understood. She lay on her mat that night and pressed her hand flat over her stomach and felt the double beat, her own and the stones, moving together in the dark. The healer arrived before dawn. His name was Ellis. He was older than Grace, older than Cale, with hands that looked like they had spent decades doing precise work and eyes that assessed everything they landed on with the same quiet thoroughness. He set his bag down outside the shelter and spent 20 minutes speaking with Grace in low voices before he came inside. He examined Nara without speaking for a long time. He pressed his fingers to different points along her sides and her back and the base of her throat. He listened to her breathing. He placed both palms flat against her stomach and was very still. When he sat back he said, "I need you to understand something before we discuss options." "Tell me," Nara said. "The heartstone has done something I have not seen before," Ellie said. "In the 4 days since you swallowed it, it has extended what I can only describe as roots. Not physical roots. Something more like connections. It has reached out through your body the way a plant reaches for light, and those connections are now threaded through your system in ways that are," he pressed his lips together. "Deep. Can you remove it?" she asked. "I can attempt it," he said. "But I want you to understand that attempting it carries a significant risk of causing damage to those connections that I cannot repair. And if those connections are severed incorrectly, the damage would not be limited to the stone. It would be to you." Nara looked at him steadily. "How significant is significant?" "More than I am comfortable with," Ellie said. "Considerably more." He left her to think about it and went to speak with Cale. Nara could hear their voices outside but not the words, only the tones, and the tones were serious and careful and not reassuring. After a while the voices stopped. Cale came in alone. He sat down across from her again on the ground, the same as the day before, and he looked at her with the same quality of attention, but there was something different in it now. Something that had not been there the previous morning. He said, "Ellis has recommended against the extraction." "I know," Nara said. I could hear it in how long the conversation was taking. The corner of his mouth moved very slightly. "He says the risk is too high. He says that forcing it now could cause you permanent harm with no guarantee that the stone would survive the process either. So the options are, leave it," Cale said. "For now. And find out what it does. Learn what it is doing to you and what it becomes over time and whether there is a safer way to remove it later, when we understand it better." Nara looked at her hands in her lap. "That is what you want?" "What I want," he said slowly, "is not the only thing that matters here." She looked up at him. "You are the one carrying it," he said. "You are the one whose body it has made a home in. You were not asked before that happened. You were not given a choice when it happened. You made a decision in a burning building with no time and no options, and you did what needed doing, and because of that decision the stone is here and safe and the raiders do not have it." He held her gaze. "I am not going to make decisions about your body without your voice in the conversation." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I was never asked anything before in my life." She had not intended to say it. It came out of some quiet place she did not usually let surface. She had been a keeper's daughter, a person who maintained things. A person who was useful in the background. The decisions were made by others, the direction was set by others, and Nara moved within those decisions like water moving through channels that someone else had dug. No one had ever asked what she wanted. Cale said nothing immediately. He looked at her with something in his eyes that she did not have a name for, something that was not pity and was not quite sympathy and was heavier and more considered than either of those things. "Then I am asking now," he said. "What do you want?" The question landed in the small canvas shelter and Nara sat with it. She thought about the burning building and the locked door and the empty iron box. She thought about 3 days of unconsciousness and the double heartbeat and Ellis pressing his palms flat against her stomach and going still. She thought about being a person who had spent her whole life being of use without being important, and she thought about what it meant that the most important object in the northern parks was currently living inside her chest. She said, "I want to understand what is happening to me. I want to know why it is doing what Ellis says it is doing. I want someone to help me understand that before any other decision is made." Kale nodded. "That is reasonable. And I want to not be kept in the dark about what people know," she added. "I want to hear things directly. Not softened, not managed. Directly." He looked at her for a moment. "I can do that." She believed him. She was not sure why, but she did. 2 days passed in which the camp moved. They could not stay in the valley, not with raiders who knew the area looking for the stone and for survivors. Kale organized the move with the same efficient attention he had given to everything else, and by the second morning the entire camp was broken down and packed and moving along a forest trail toward a more defensible location 2 ridges north. Nara walked with the others. Her body still felt off-balanced, still felt like it was carrying something extra, but the burning had faded into that settled heaviness as she could move without pain. Ellis walked beside her for part of the journey and answered her questions with more honesty than she had expected. He told her that the heartstone's bonds to her body were continuing to develop. He told her it was treading deeper, not faster but steadier, like it had found a good place and was making itself comfortable. He told her he had never seen the stone behave this way in any record or account he had ever read, and he had read a great many of them, and this was either unprecedented or it was something that had happened before and had not been written down because no one expected it to matter. "Why would it matter?" she asked. Ellis looked at her sideways. "Because the heartstone carries the soul bond of the founding bloodlines," he said. "And if it is choosing to bond with someone outside those bloodlines, someone it had no reason to recognize, that suggests that either the stone has different criteria for connection than we assumed, or," he paused, "or you have something we did not account for." "I am a keeper's daughter," Nara said. "I have no bloodline claim." "You have something," Ellis said madly. "The stone is not mistaken. It does not bond with things arbitrarily." She thought about that for the rest of the walk. The new camp was better. Higher ground, more cover, a stream nearby and sight lines in 3 directions. By evening it was established and people were settled and the fires were small and carefully placed so the light did not carry too far. Kale came to her after dark. He sat beside her on a fallen log at the edge of the camp and they looked out at the dark tree line together without speaking for a while, which was a comfortable kind of quiet that Nara had not expected to find with him. He said, "Ellis tells me the bonds are deepening." "He told me also," she said. "He said the stone might have reasons we do not understand." "The stone has always had reasons we did not fully understand," Kale said. "That was always part of what it was. The old texts say it thinks in a way that is not like our thinking. Slower. Wider. More patient." "Patient," she said. "Yes." She pressed her hand to her stomach without thinking about it. The double beat, steady. Her own and the stone's. "Do you feel it from out there?" she asked. "The way you did when it was in the box?" He was quiet for a moment. "More clearly," he said. She looked at him. "Much more clearly," he said. "In the box it was always there, a direction I could locate, a warmth I could sense." Now, he stopped. He looked out at the trees. "Now it is like a voice I can almost hear. Not words. Just presence. And it is not still the way it was before. It is doing something." "What is it doing?" she asked, and she was asking about more than the stone now, and she thought he knew that. "I do not know yet," he said. He said it simply, without embarrassment. He was a man who governed an enormous territory and commanded the loyalty of many packs, and he had just said, simply and plainly, that he did not know something. She found she respected that more than she could easily explain. They sat there until the fire at the center of camp burned lower and people began moving to their sleeping places, and then Nara went to her own shelter and lay down and felt the double beat in the dark and thought about everything Ellis had said and everything Kale had said, and none of it resolved into something simple by morning. 3 nights after the camp moved, the shaman arrived. He came from the east. One of the scouts found him at the edge of the forest at midnight, standing still in the dark as though he had been waiting for someone to notice him. He was older than Ellis, older than anyone Nara had ever seen, and he carried no visible weapons, which she had learned in the past week was sometimes more frightening than carrying many. His name was Devon. He had traveled from the raider camp. Cale received him in the open center of the camp, in full view of everyone, which Nara understood was a choice about visibility, about not having conversations that people could later distort. She stood at the edge of the gathered group with Grace beside her and watched. Devon spoke for a long time. Cale listened. His face did not change, but his hands, which were at his sides, closed very slowly into fists during the first minute of listening and did not open again. Owen was close enough to catch some of the words and he relayed them to Nara in a low voice. The raiders had not given up on the heartstone. They had been hired to retrieve it by someone whose name Devon did not give and Cale did not press for, not here, not in the open. They knew the stone had not burned. They knew someone had taken it out of the sanctuary before the fire finished. They had ways of finding it. Devon said all of this as though he were delivering a weather report. As though it were information, not a threat, which Nara understood meant he knew perfectly well that it was a threat and was simply choosing a more refined delivery. And then he said the word that made Grace's hand tighten on Nora's arm. He said he could remove the stone. Not from the iron box. From a person carrying it. The method, he said, was straightforward. Not painless. Not safe for the carrier. But certain. The carrier would not survive the removal. But the stone would be intact. Nara heard this from 30 feet away through Owen's low relay and she stood very still and thought about the double heartbeat in her chest and felt, for the first time since the night of the fire, something that was not fear but was close to it. Cale turned his head and looked directly at her across the camp. Not for long. Just a moment. Then he looked back at Devon. He said something Nara could not hear. Devon left the way he came. Cale came to find her 20 minutes later, and the look on his face was controlled in a way that took effort. You heard, he said. Enough, she said. He sat down beside her on the ground, not the fallen log this time, just the ground, as though he had not had time to look for a better option. He looked at her with that direct attention and said, you need to know everything now. Not managed. Directly. As you asked. Yes, she said. He told her what she had already partially heard and then the rest of it. The raiders had not scattered. They had regrouped 2 valleys east with more numbers than they had started with, which meant someone was supplying them with both people and resources. They would move again within days. They knew the approximate territory where the surviving pack had resettled. They had Devon, who could track the Heartstone's presence. He could feel the stone from a distance, the way Cale could, but differently. Not as connection. As a signal to locate. How close does he need to be? Nara asked. We are not certain, Cale said. Close enough. He was at the edge of our perimeter tonight. And the raiders come with him. Yes. Nara was quiet. The double heartbeat, steady as always. Her own and the stone's, side by side. There is something Ellis noticed this morning, Cale said. He said it in a different tone, not the controlled threat assessment tone but something else. He was examining you again, the bond. He said, he stopped. Directly, Nara said. He said the bond is no longer just deepening, Cale said. He said it is beginning to respond. The stone is beginning to do something active. Not just making connections inside you, but generating something. A kind of feel that Ellis has no word for. He has seen it in objects before, very old pack artifacts, but never in a person, and never at this level. Nara looked at her hands. What does it mean? She asked. He believes the stone may be treating you as a vessel in a way it has never treated the iron box, Cale said. The box held it. Contained it. You are, he searched for the word. Different. He believes it may be using you to do something it could not do in the box. What can't it do in the box? Cale said, live. The word sat between them in the dark. She thought about what it meant. The heartstone, 300 years of soul-bond and bloodline connection, pressing itself into a living body, not to be contained but to be alive. To have a pulse. To have something beating alongside it that was not the cold stillness of iron. She thought about what Ellis had said, that the stone did not bond arbitrarily. She thought about the dream she had the night after she swallowed it. The river that had been flowing for so long it had stopped being in a hurry. The voices layered on top of each other. The mountain with the sky the same color as the stone. "Kill," she said. He looked at her. "The raiders are going to come," she said. "And Devin can find me wherever I go. And running only delays it." She kept her voice steady. She had decided something and she wanted to say it clearly before the steadiness failed. "I will not run." He looked at her for a long moment. "I did not expect you to," he said. They planned through the night. Ellis and Grace and Cale and Nara, and Owen who stayed because no one sent him away, and 2 others from the pack whose names she was beginning to know. They planned around the fire with the mist coming in and the double heartbeat steady in Nara's chest, and what they planned was not a retreat. It was something the old text did not have a name for. Because the old text had not accounted for a living person carrying a living stone in a body that the stone had decided was worth caring about. The raiders came at dawn. They came from the east as expected, through the tree line into the valley where the camp sat, and they came in numbers, which meant they were confident, and confidence was the particular kind of mistake that well-supplied people made when they had won enough times to forget that conditions changed. Nara was standing in the center of the camp when they arrived. She had chosen to stand there. She had made that choice at some point in the night, between the planning and the first gray light, and she had not explained it to anyone fully because she was not certain she could. She knew only that running had been the strategy of the past week and it had brought the raiders to the edge of the camp anyway, and that there was something in her that had decided the edge was here. The heartstone was warm. Not the burning heat of the first night, not the cold in water sensation that had knocked her down and kept her down for 3 days. Something different. A steady, focused warmth that moved with her heartbeat, or perhaps moved her heartbeat. She was not certain anymore where the line was between her own rhythm and the stones. Devin was at the front of the raider group. He saw her. His eyes moved to the center of her, the same way Cale's had on the first morning, that sense of location, of a direction being confirmed. He stopped walking. The raiders behind him stopped too. Nara stood still. What happened in the valley that morning has been described several ways by the people who were there. Grace said afterward that the light changed fast, which she could not explain and did not try to. Owen said what he noticed was the sound, that the birds in the trees went quiet all at once as though someone had drawn a curtain across the morning. The 2 guards who had traveled with Cale said they felt something move through the ground, something that was not an earthquake but had that quality of largeness, of something very old shifting in its sleep. Nara felt it all. The warmth moved from her center outward the way it had on the first night, but this time it did not stop at her fingertips. It kept going. It moved past the edges of her body and into the air and into the ground and outward in every direction at once, slowly, steadily, the way a tide moves. Not fast. Not violent. Devin took a step backward. He was a man who could feel the heartstone the way he could feel changes in weather, as a distant knowing in the bones. He had tracked it across 2 mountain ranges. He had stood at the edge of camp in the dark and sent a clear message through an old man about what he could do and what would happen. He was very sure of himself. The look on his face when the warmth reached him was not what a sure person looked like. He took another step backward. The raiders behind him shifted. They were looking at each other with the particular uncertainty of people whose certainty had just changed shape. Nara had not raised her hands. She had not said anything. She was standing in the center of the camp in plain sight and the heartstone was doing something she did not have words for, something the old text did not have words for, something that moved through the air of the valley like 300 years of soul bond deciding what it was willing to protect. Cale was behind her and to the left. He said her name, quietly, once. She said, "I know." The warmth kept moving. Devin turned. He spoke to the men behind him. She did not understand the words. She did not need to. She watched them turn. She watched them move back through the tree line, first the ones at the back, then more, then Daven himself, until the valley was quiet and the birds in the trees came back and Owen said something behind her that she did not catch because she was very focused on staying upright. She sat down on the ground. Her legs had made that decision for her. Kale crouched in front of her. He put his hands on her shoulders with a steadiness that helped. Her vision was doing something at the edges, a brightness she was blinking against. "I am fine," she said. "You are sitting on the ground in the middle of the camp," he said. "I am fine on the ground," she said. He looked at her with that attention, that compass needle stillness, and then something happened to his expression that she had not seen on it before. It was not soft exactly. It was open. A door with hinges it had forgotten it had, and this time the door was moving. Ellis crouched beside her and began his assessment and she let him, and over his shoulder she could see the camp moving, people coming out from behind the trees where they had waited, coming toward the center where she was sitting, looking at her with expressions that she did not have a category for. Not the look people gave objects that were useful. Not the look people gave strangers who had wandered in from somewhere else. The double heartbeat settled into a rhythm she had not felt before. Her own beat and the stone's beat, moving in the same time, the same pace, easy as breathing. Ellis looked up from his examination. He said, "The connections are different." Nara looked at him. "They were deepening before," he said. "Becoming more numerous. Now they are," he pressed his lips together, thinking. "They are not reaching anymore. They have settled. Like something that was building has finished building." She thought about what Kale had said the night before. The stone may be using you to do something it could not do in the box. To live. And now it had. She looked at Kale over Ellis's head. He was still crouched in front of her, hands still on her shoulders, watching her with the open expression that was new. She said, "You have words for this now?" He said, "No." "Neither do I," she said. He stayed where he was. The morning moved into full light around them. The mist burned off the valley in the way it always did when the sun got high enough, and the camp behind them was the sound of people who were still alive and still moving and still making plans, because that was what they did. Nora pressed her hand to her stomach out of habit. Her heart beat. The stone's heartbeat. The same. She had no name for what that made her. She thought Kale might need a long time to find one. She thought that might be all right.